Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for inviting me to be here today. It's a great space. I was telling some people earlier that I went to undergrad at Lemoyne and we didn't have anything like this. And I think this is really valuable that every week you guys can come together and have lunch and hear a nice speaker, and I think that's a valuable thing. So here's what I'm going to cover quickly. I'm going to talk a bit about myself, my history, why I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm going to dive right into a Tiny Home for Good, the organization I founded and now run, and share two takeaways, then I'll open it up for questions. So I anticipate talking for about 30 to 35 minutes, then I hope to leave a good 10, 15 minutes or however much time we have left for questions. And I'm going to have to keep walking back and forth. I hope that's not a problem. So first and foremost, before I get into talking about me, I'm going to talk about my folks because they have had a profound impact on me. And this is my mother. She was born in Syracuse and went to college. When she left college, she spent a year in Peru. She was discerning whether she wanted to join religious life there. Decided that she didn't want to. She came back to Syracuse, became a social worker, and became the director of the Dorothy Day Homeless Shelter. So it's a homeless shelter for women that's still very active in Syracuse. Now my father, a little bit different route. That's a hard picture to see. He was born in Jamestown, New York. Right after high school, he joined the seminary, and as fast as you could possibly become a priest, he became a priest. He became a Catholic priest at a parish in Syracuse, St. John the Baptist, which is on the north side. After 5 years, however, he realized that the priesthood really wasn't for him. He wanted a family, and he was also really not happy at the parish he was in. He was in Vatican II and was really excited by the changes, but his parish was not excited one bit. So he was a little taken aback, and he left the priesthood. Now, my parents both had a mutual friend, and she was kind of playing matchmaker, and she knew that my father was really handy. He could do any sort of electrical work. My mother was working at this, really bare-bones homeless shelter that was on a really tight budget, so she connected my father there to help with some of their electrical problems. And like the first week, he got a ton done. Then the second week, he went back and got a little bit less done and spent more time talking to my mom. And then the third week, you see how it went. And then finally, in 1985, they got married. Now, I was born in Syracuse, but when I was 7, we moved outside of Boston, which is a small suburb called Needham. And Needham is it's an incredible school system, okay, 99% graduation rate, 100% white, and pretty much like a bubble. However, my folks went out of their way to kind of introduce my brother and I to kind of more kind of social justice, community-minded endeavors. For example, we went to church in Boston. We served at a soup kitchen a couple times a week there. We did the Fresh Air Funds. We invited kids from New York City to come spend summers and vacations with us. But just one quick story, and if I really think back on it, it's kind of my first foray into homelessness. And my mother and I were walking down the street in Boston, and I looked ahead, and about half a block ahead, there was a woman who was leaning up against a wall, panhandling, asking for money. And I asked my mom if we could go to the other side of the street because I just didn't feel comfortable. I didn't have money. I didn't know how to navigate that situation. So she grabbed my hand, and I was expecting her to take me to the other side of the street. But instead, we kept on walking, and we got up to the woman, and she kind of led me around and sat me down on one side, and my mom sat down on the other side. Then we just engaged in a conversation. And I don't remember what we talked about. I'm sure it wasn't all that profound, but I remember the woman's smile, and we got up and walked away. We didn't give her any money. But that interaction has stuck with me for, I don't know, it's probably 8 or 9. And I think that just speaks to kind of the home that my mother tried to raise my brother and I in. Now, as I said, I wish that that those ideals that my parents were teaching me, that what my mom showed me was something that I just dove right into at 9 years old and decided to commit my life to ending homelessness. But far from the case. Instead, I was dedicated to playing soccer. I loved to swim. I loved ultimate frisbee. And I thought I was going to play soccer at college. However, senior year of high school came, and we started applying for schools, and I didn't get accepted to 2 of the schools that I really wanted to go to, and I just wasn't really sure if college was the right choice at that moment. So I took a step back, and I decided to take a year off. And I moved to Cleveland, Ohio, and I took part in an AmeriCorps program called City Year, where I was a substitute teacher in a special education classroom in an inner city school in Cleveland, Ohio. And I did this because my mom's a special ed teacher, and if you haven't figured out yet, she's a really big part of my life, and I try and follow her through and through. However, after a week or so, I realized that special education teaching was not for me. Teaching probably wasn't for me. However, it made for a really interesting year because it was the first time I had ever lived on my own. So it was the first time I had to pay bills, first time I had to cook for myself, first time I had to get to work on my own. And I remember like a month in, I called my mom and asked her, how long do I put a baked potato in the microwave for? Which seems like an insane question, but I took for granted the impact that they had and what they kind of, provided for my brother and I as we grew up. However, I finished the year, didn't have to call about baked potatoes anymore, figured out the bus route, figured out what made me happy. And one of the reasons why I finished that year was because what made me happy was spending time in a homeless shelter that was right around the corner from where I was living. And the work that I was doing at school was tough, and I was looking for kind of some sort of outlet, and that homeless shelter provided that for me, where I would go in and serve food and meet guys who had incredibly different lives from what I led. And that really appealed to me. Now, in 2008, I enrolled at Lemoyne College. And I don't know if I would have done this, but my father required that I defer my admission to a school if he was going to let me take that year off. So I started at Lemoyne College in 2008, which is a Jesuit school in Syracuse. And I immediately hit the ground running, volunteering at a local soup kitchen called the Samaritan Center. Beautiful, beautiful place. They serve about 300 meals a day. And no questions asked, anyone is welcome there. And I also started running Bible studies and writing groups at a local homeless shelter. It's called the Oxford Street Inn. That's a picture of it up there. Incredibly bare bones. So all it is like pretty much a big gym floor with nothing but cots and occasional sandwiches, and then we do laundry for the guys. So for 3 years I ran Bible studies there. I was eventually hired on staff. And a piece that I hated about working on staff was that at 7 a.m., if I worked the overnight shift, at 7 a.m., I had to kick guys out of the shelter. Okay? It didn't matter if they were, in their early 70s or if they had pneumonia or if they were in a walker or a wheelchair. At 7 a.m., the rules were that they had to leave. I remember it would be like -5 degrees out, and I was kind of pushing these guys out into the cold because we had no option. So my junior year in Lemoyne, I was thinking there's got to be like a better option for this. There's got to be something else I can do. So I reached around and found a local community center that was right around the corner. And I asked him if I could open it up 3 times a week for coffee and conversation to get guys out of the cold. And that's what it started as. So people would leave the shelter and they might go try and find work, they might go downtown, or they would go to this community center. And it was wonderful. Again, started to build more relationships with guys. But as anything, the weather improved and no one wanted to sit inside. And around this time, I had fallen in love with a bicycle, so I decided to combine like my love of building these relationships with these guys and the bicycle, and I started the organization Pedal the Possibilities. And what it is just a group bike ride with individuals facing homelessness. So every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, people can go on a group bike ride, and after they join us for 10 rides, they get to keep the bike, and we give them a lock and a helmet. And we get about 15 to 20 people every morning. I wasn't there this morning, but they rode today. I'm sure they ride rain, snow, whatever. And there's a couple things I love about it. One is that, it's a healthy activity for guys who rarely get healthy activities. It's a way for someone to get a bike, so they have a form of transportation, don't have to pay $4 for a bus ticket. But I think the most important piece is that if you look at like the guys who are riding, you can't tell really who came from the shelter the night before or who came from under the bridge the night before from someone who may come from like down the hill from Syracuse University, or someone who drives their bike in and puts on and just goes for a ride. I think it's very different from the typical, soup kitchen line where you're serving across a soup kitchen line and kind of that's it. You're riding right next to someone, and I think it's that building the relationships. I'm going to hammer this home that's so important. Now, I graduated from Lemoyne in 2012, and the day after I graduated, I was seeing a girl at the time who was really into biking as well, and we decided to take a cross-country bicycle trip to raise money for that community center I talked about. And I mention this because I had no idea what I wanted to do after I graduated from college, like none. And as I was going across the country, I had tons of options. I could have gotten to California and continued down to Mexico. I could have found work in California. I had thoughts of moving to Chicago because it seemed like a cool city. But as I got further across the country, I realized that I wanted to be back in Syracuse more and more and more to kind of relate back and work closely with the guys who I got to know through Pedal the Possibilities and my work at the homeless shelter. So after 63 days, we made it to San Francisco. She spent some time with her grandparents. I spent some time with my cousins. And then I flew back to Syracuse and had this idea. And the idea was to, again, open up a home for guys facing homelessness. And I still live there today. So I signed a lease on a home on the south side of Syracuse and invited guys who I got to know through Pedal the Possibilities, through my work at the shelter, to come and live with me. And the goal was to try and form a kind of community that would support these individuals as they, made their way through sobriety, tried to find employment, and get them hooked up with the services necessary. Now, it was a very difficult project because I was asking guys who, had very few years or very little time sober, who might not have the medication they necessarily need. And I learned very quickly that if I wanted to make this work, I had to incorporate a couple different things. So, I required sobriety at the house. I encouraged guys to see a case manager, and that we have meals 3 times a week together. And it worked for some people. For some people, I had to ask them to move back to the shelter. But I would say right now I'm in a good spot where I can provide services to guys in a way that they're not asking a ton out of me, and I can give them what they need. At this same time, I was going to grad school at Syracuse University and got my master's in public administration. And after I graduated from Maxwell in 2014, I hit the ground running on an organization called A Tiny Home for Good. Now I want to dive right into that. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our why, so why our organization exists, what we're trying to accomplish. I'm going to talk about our process, a couple of the roadblocks we've had, and talk about where we are right now, and then our hopes for 2017. And now, principally our why. And it really comes back to my time working at the shelter. So another piece of my work there was that I helped guys move out. So often guys would find apartments that were within their price range, running around $350, $400. And when they found those rooms or small bedrooms, I would help them pack up and, send them on their way. And almost every single interaction was met with, I'll see you soon. So that's what they would say to the shelter staff, because they almost knew that they were going to be back there in a matter of months. And sure enough, it wasn't months, it might not even be weeks, it might be a couple days, they were right back at the shelter doors. I started scratching my head, wondering why in the hell these guys just get out of the shelter, and then in a matter of weeks, they're right back with us. And it comes back to this gentleman, Barry, who I lived with for about 4 months. Amazing guy, super smart, super intelligent, he could not stop drinking. And he was living with us, and for the first month it was great. Second month I could see he was starting to drink a little bit more. Third month it became too much, and on the fourth I had to ask him to move back to the shelter. However, a couple weeks in the shelter he called me and asked if I could give him a ride to a place that he just found. It was a $400 apartment, within his price range, pretty much all he could do. So I said, sure. So we threw his stuff in my truck, we drove downtown, and we got to the apartment complex. And when I opened the door to the apartment complex, you met with this odor of mold and mouse droppings and all sorts of mess. You had to walk up these stairs where half of them were broken. There were cockroaches running up and down the wall. Got to the top of the stairs and turned, and you got to Barry's room finally. And it was probably about half the size of this stage, with a saggy mattress and there was a cabinet with no drawers in it. So I kind of left Barry's stuff there, and all right, good luck. And I left, and 4 hours later he called me and said, Andrew, I'd rather be at the shelter. So that got me thinking, what's available for individuals facing homelessness, what's in their price range, what they really need just doesn't exist. There's nowhere to support any long-term stability that's affordable, that's dignified and safe. So when I graduated from Maxwell, I didn't want to apply for work anymore, so I founded this organization, A Tiny Home for Good, and our goal is to provide safe, affordable, and dignified housing for individuals facing homelessness. And in November 2014, started building a board of directors who can kind of help me to, one, fundraise, and also do the kind of things that I don't know how to do. For example, there's a lawyer on our board, there's an accountant, there's someone very knowledgeable in construction management. All these pieces of the organization that I'm not an expert in, I was able to find people who were dedicated to the mission to help. Now I want to talk about our process. I'll try and keep this as enjoyable as possible because it's kind of nitty-gritty, but the first piece is to identify and acquire vacant lots. So I don't know if anyone's familiar with Syracuse, but you can drive through entire neighborhoods and see maybe 1 or 2 houses that are occupied, meaning that the rest of the properties are either vacant or abandoned. And the idea of having entire city neighborhoods where there might be 1 or 2 houses occupied is insane. So our goal is to find and acquire vacant lots and build on there. So once we find them, we construct 250 square foot homes, which is really quite small. It's about the size of 1-car garage, but if you see that's the schematic for one of the homes, there's very little to it. So there's a small bathroom, with a shower, a small vanity, and a toilet. There's a kitchen space with a hanging microwave, plenty of cabinetry, a small refrigerator and a hot plate, and then a bed. And when I often share this with people, they say, like, that's insane. How does anybody live in a space that small? And I think that's a really interesting question, because for individuals facing homelessness, they don't want like a palace. They're not looking for a big 4-bedroom place. They're looking for somewhere that they can leave in the morning and know that their stuff's going to be there when they come back. And they're looking for something they can live in on their own. And I think a tiny home for good, our model, really, really matches that. Now, an important piece of our work is engaging volunteers. So there's a group from ESF who helped frame the walls on the first 2 properties we built. They spent a week helping us. And then we've had dozens of groups from local churches, from local schools, come out just to kind of lend a hand at different pieces. And that has made our first build, which I'll talk about in the future, feasible. So instead of paying like a contractor to kind of do a lot of work that we could just engage volunteers to do, we were able to get people into our work, share about our mission, and really save a significant amount of money. Now, once built, I mean, this is where the rubber hits the road. So we get referrals from local shelters, local hospitals, and local community centers. And with those referrals, there's a small application process where we ask, like, what's their income? Do they have regular case management support? Some of the other questions ask, what has their employment history been, and what has their housing history been? This is just to kind of get a sense of if they really are like a good candidate for our home. If there's someone who needs a lot more support than we're able to give, then it would just be a burden on us and also for them if they moved into our home. And then this is also super crucial, is the kind of resident follow-up. So instead of like, what's pretty typical is guys will move into a home and then often that's kind of, all right, that's it, good luck. We're really intentional about having regular community meals. So once the first Sunday of every month, we all come together. Residents, our board, future residents come together and have a meal. And then I'm over at our first site almost daily checking up on the 2 guys who are living there. And that's James and Dolphus. And Dolphus has been a dynamite keeping track of the lawn and everything like that. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about our roadblocks. Now, as I said, we started in November of 2014, and I was intent on trying to find property for free. So there's city and county agencies that own a lot of this vacant property I was talking about, and they're looking to give it away to developers. So I applied and asked if we could, really build our tiny homes. And they said, yeah, you can do that. You have the money, you have the builders ready to go. You just need neighborhood support. So I went to this first location on Marcellus Street, and knocked on the neighbor's door. Actually, I bounded up to the neighbor's door. I was super excited to share what we're going to be doing. And the very first thing I was told was like, oh, hell no, we do not want that in our neighborhood. We do not want any homeless people in our neighborhood. Then I went to the next door and heard the same, and the next door, and the next door, and the next door. And eventually the city agency that was hoping to give us this property was getting so many phone calls from neighbors that they said, whoa, we really can't do this. This would look really bad if we gave you this piece of property. So we decided, okay, we're not going to do that one. Instead, it's turned into a parking lot in the middle of a residential neighborhood, which is a real shame. The other property was at West Kennedy Street, which is another neighborhood on the south side. It was owned by the county. And again, they said, great, that's awesome. We're thrilled you're going to be building on here. We're thrilled you have the money. We're thrilled you have the builders. Just go out and tell neighbors what you're thinking about doing. It's just a minor formality. So again, I went out with a little bit more trepidation. Got the same exact response, absolutely not. We don't want drug addicts. We don't want alcoholics. We don't want the mentally ill in our neighborhood. We don't want to have to step over people when we're going to work in the morning. And we had community meetings where I'd be standing up here telling about what we were going to do. I could barely finish the presentations because people were so upset at it. So ultimately, sorry, I'll back up a bit. Ultimately, again, the county said, look, we're getting too many calls from neighbors. We're getting too many calls from local communities. We just can't give you this property. So that took us until the end of 2015. And at the end of 2015, I realized that there's no way we're going to get neighborhood approval to do this. The stigma that surrounds homelessness is too great. The concept of a tiny home is also a little bit too abstract. So I said, we need to find a way to do this on our own. So I spent a whole night looking for every piece of vacant property in the city of Syracuse. And I identified one in a perfect location south of the city. The woman lived a couple miles outside of the city. I went, knocked on her door, told her our story, and asked if we could buy it from her. And I think she liked what we were doing with it. She liked that she didn't have to pay taxes on it. She liked that we were giving her $3,000 for it. And ultimately, we bought it from her, and we were able to do what we wanted to. So at the beginning of 2016, as soon as the weather turned, we poured the foundation on a 2-unit home. And you can kind of see the progression as it goes through. And again, we're engaging tons of volunteers, getting subcontractors to donate in-kind support, materials. And finally, in July of this year, we were able to, I mean, that's what it ended up with. So that's a 2-unit home, 250 square feet each. And we had a beautiful ribbon cutting where 250 people from communities, city officials, neighbors from the properties where we wanted to build on came over to see these homes. And Dolphus, our first resident, was one of the keynote speakers. The mayor showed up. That's our board president, Chris Kratzert. And it was really something special because I think people showed up because it was ultimately hopeful. So like we were building on these vacant lots that no one thinks about anymore. Nobody thinks about anymore. And I mean, we were thrilled to put something up there that's no longer a trash heap, and being able to house 2 guys there was really special. Now, property number 2, this is at South Salina Street. I was speaking on a radio show talking about our program, and the owners of Lamar Advertising, it's a billboard firm, contacted me and said that they had a vacant lot that they wanted to get rid of. It's on a street called South Salina. It used to have tons of traffic on it, but no longer has that much traffic. So they're paying taxes on it, and they just wanted to get rid of it. So I said, sure, happily take it off your hands. So we cleaned it up, and as you can tell, there's a forest behind it. And we had a good group of volunteers come in. We chopped down all the trees. And it was really interesting because we didn't get the same community pushback that I got in other places. And you know why? It's because in that forest we found things like hypodermic needles. We found guys were camping there. I hesitate to say this, but we found a bag with a dead dog in it and just really awful things, okay? And neighbors saw how bad that this was for the neighborhood. They knew how bad this forest was for the neighborhood, and they were thrilled to see it being cleaned up and happy that it was going to be provided for guys facing homelessness, which was a welcome change of tone. We were able to engage a couple local subcontractors to donate their time and labor and support. So this is the foundation, so it's going to be a 3-unit property. There's one of the units, and yeah, and come November 11th, Friday, November 11th, we're having our ribbon cutting there. That's Dolphus. He's one of the residents at the other one. He's there every single day helping clean. And that's Ted. He's going to be another one of the residents. And again, ribbon cutting Friday, November 11th. That's Veterans Day. It's at 3 p.m. I shared the time with Mark, and y'all are welcome to come. Now, I want to quickly share about 2017. We're getting to work on a project called the Bellevue Corridor Project. A local organization is donating us 7 vacant properties, and we're going to be building 7 units there in the spring, along with a laundry facility. And what I like about this, it's going to be a mix of housing. So certainly the majority of the units will be for individuals facing homelessness, but we'll also have 2 of the units for seniors who are living in the area who are kind of looking to age in place, who want to stay in the south side of Syracuse but don't necessarily want to move in with a family member or don't want to move to a nursing home. So we're hoping to build a handicap accessible kind of 1-floor floor plan for individuals like that. Now, before I open it up to questions, I have 2 quick takeaways. And the first is that when I think back to 2014, we were trying to work so closely with the city and with the county, I realized that we were facing a lot of resistance that I didn't know we were going to be facing. So I think the most important lesson that I took away was take the path of least resistance. And as soon as I realized that if we bought a piece of property and just did it on our own, things would move a whole lot faster. And second, and most importantly, is to stay connected. Now, I kind of glossed over this, but at the end of 2015, when the second time we were denied property, I was about this close to moving to DC and kind of going the route that most of my other MPA graduates did, where they would go to DC and staff for a politician or something like that, just because I thought like this was impossible. However, I knew Dolphus too well, and I knew the other guys that peddled possibilities too well. I knew that Dolphus was going to be, staying on a friend's couch or staying under a bridge, and that just didn't feel right. Putting in this year of work, year of raising money to just kind of say, Dolphus, good luck. And ultimately, like when we went and bought that piece of property, like that was my commitment to Dolphus, saying, yeah, I told you I was going to build this thing, and I'm going to do it. So if I didn't stay connected, knowing Dolphus, knowing the individuals that peddle the possibilities, I'm sure that I wouldn't be here right now. So that's all I've got. Now, I ran over a lot, and I'd like to open up for questions. It can be about my upbringing, it can be about a tiny home for good, it can be about anything, how you want to get involved, or just questions about homelessness. But I feel like most good stuff in these presentations come out with questions. But, yeah.
So do you see this as like maybe not in the next 2-3 years, but like maybe 10 years down the road, like as branching out beyond just Syracuse? Yeah.
So the question was, do I see it branching out beyond just Syracuse? And absolutely. I mean, if I just mentioned Syracuse. If you go to downtown, if you go south of downtown Syracuse, you'll see vast tracts of vacant land. You can go to just south of like downtown Rochester or northeast Rochester or parts of Buffalo or Erie, Pennsylvania. Like all Rust Belt cities are facing these same issues, and homelessness just kind of is part of that as well. So absolutely, I'd love to see us branch out. Now, I mean, we got to get it working here first, but yeah, I anticipate doing that for sure. Yeah.
Why did you choose the tiny home model rather than, say, a larger building of apartment style, something like that?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. It'd probably be more economical, actually, to like rehab a motel or something like that. However, the issues that the individuals were housing or facing are, alcoholism, diagnosed, undiagnosed mental illness, drug addiction. And when individuals facing those issues are living together, they just compound on top of each other. And when you think about, a dorm setting, for example, like you can't live in a dorm setting for the rest of your life, for sure. And I would not expect guys moving out of the shelter to have to live in a dorm for the rest of their life. So offering them something that's a little bit more dignified than an apartment setup, I think is invaluable. Yeah. Yeah.
Why 250 square feet? I've done some research into tiny homes, and so I know there's issues with zoning laws or so why 250?
Yeah. So actually in Syracuse it's kind of neat. There is no minimum size. So it could be we could have built like a 20 square foot home if we really wanted to. But 250 square foot just made sense for the kind of properties that we're building on. We want to put 3 units on one property. Like if it's much bigger than that, they're almost going to be touching. With the property we first built on, it was a substandard lot, meaning it wasn't even buildable. So we had to go to the city and petition to have it expanded. So that being said, 250 really was about the maximum we could build it. And also we're able to fit everything we want to in there. Now, when I think about our future builds, we're going to have to blow that up if we want to make it handicap accessible, if we want to add a little bit of storage space, and we certainly will. But I don't anticipate going beyond like 350 square feet.
Okay, so it's kind of just because this is, at this point, the minimum for comfortable living?
I'd say maximum, like the maximum for comfortable living. Yeah, if we were any bigger than that, it would be a struggle. Yeah, to fit it onto the property.
How much are these units costing, and how are you getting the funds to do them?
Sure. So each unit costs $22,500. Now that is based with a lot of volunteer help. We bid it out to a construction management company, and to do that 2-unit build we first did, they were going to charge us $120,000 for the whole thing, whereas we were able to do it for about $50,000. Now that's using volunteers. I'm leading the project. And thankfully, we've had a lot of support from local parishes, local schools that I go and speak at that have heard kind of a bit about Peddle the Possibilities, about my work opening up this home, and people really have donated. Had a little bit of foundation support, but most of it is just from private donations. And now, thankfully, we have a revenue stream through resident rent. I didn't really mention that. So residents pay rent based on their income. For example, if someone's making Social Security, their rent is 30% of whatever that total is, which keeps it quite affordable. And if someone's working, it's $300 flat, and a tiny home for good covers all the utilities. So which is nice because that'll cover utilities, taxes, any sort of maintenance we'll need to do. But if we want to go out and build, I have to go out and raise that money. So when I'm not like on the job site building or not speaking, I'm in front of a computer typing on grants and stuff like that. But yeah, that's how we're making it work. You had a question?
It was exactly that same question.
A couple questions. First of all, who owns it? And then, is it a nonprofit? Do you still have to pay taxes? Because I'm sure the city happy to have revenue stream coming
For sure.
from there. And also, aren't some of these communities like concerned about vacant properties in the same way with the forest? It becomes a haven for community destroying activities, or houses that become crack houses and things like that, which I'm sure is happening.
Sure.
And maybe you could get some permission to demolish a property
Mhm.
and
then build on it.
build on it.
So the first part, a Tiny Home for Good, the organization I run owns them. And we're a 501c3 not-for-profit. However, we have to pay full property taxes on all of our units, which I mean, honestly, I feel comfortable doing that. So, like, that's political, and people say, well, why aren't you paying property taxes? Aren't you going to, like, how are you getting out of this? But no, we're paying property taxes. We're putting stuff back on the payroll. And more importantly, though, to get to your question about why, I mean, almost like why aren't neighbors embracing this, right? I think it really comes down to the fact that homelessness is so stigmatized. So often the only idea that people have of individuals facing homelessness is like the one that I had when I was 9 years old about that woman on the side of the street, or about the one that you get when you drive off 690, the exit ramp on 690, and see the individual begging on the side of the road. And really, that's only about 6, maybe half dozen, 10 people in the city of Syracuse who are doing that. There's 800 people facing homelessness in Syracuse. So that's 790 people who are trying to make it work, who are dealing with drug and alcohol addictions in ways that aren't hurting anybody, but just have never had the support systems that I might have had when I was growing up. So that stigma surrounding homelessness is what ultimately is keeping people from building. You keep allowing us from building, or allowing neighborhoods to say, wow, this is a great idea. Now, I am so thankful that we were able to buy a piece of property and just steamroll it through and just build it without having any neighborhood support. Because as I said, at that ribbon cutting, there were a handful of neighbors from the neighborhoods we were hoping to build in. They came and saw these homes. It's like, wow, these are a little bit better than the parking lot that I now live next to. Or this is a little bit better than the trash-filled lot that's still there that I just had to, pay $50 to get that TV out of. So yeah, I think that, success follows success, and I'm just thankful that we were able to get something in the ground.
How do you support yourself?
Myself? Yeah. So up until we moved residents in, I worked nights at a local homeless shelter. Now, however, I have a stipend from a Tiny Home for Good. So also, if I want to support myself, I need to hit the ground making money as well. So raising money and doing grants.
This is a big kind of, I guess, shift in topic. I find your courage in doing this to be remarkable, really remarkable. It takes a lot of guts to do what you're doing.
Thanks,
Where do you think that comes from? And how do you deal with, presumably there are times when you're fearful about this stuff, or you're whatever. How do you manage
Yeah.
How do you manage that?
I said it over and over, and you hear it often, but those relationships that you build is what kept me motivated. Like, as I said, at the end of 2015, I really was thinking about just packing up shop, donating the money to that community center that I had grown so close with, and just saying, look, I want to do something else. But I couldn't. I knew Dolphus too well. I knew the other guys who would ultimately be benefiting from these homes. And that is, I think, what has kind of, kept me motivated to go knock on more neighbors' doors, or knock on that woman's door and say, look, can we buy this property from you? That is what I think has kept me motivated. Now, if we back up more, I think it really is just my mother's influence, really not sheltering me from anything. So really engaging me in every sort of conversation imaginable, and just being very clear that there's other people in this world who just haven't had the same support as I had. And that they're not worse than me, I'm not better than them, it's just they haven't had the same support. So a combo of, that upbringing, and then me kind of stepping up and saying, look, I really want to build relationships with these guys, and that really has sustained it. All right. Any other questions? Yeah?
I have one. It's not really a question, but I think you've done a really good job with it, and not saying homeless person.
Yeah.
Because it's something that they're facing, and being very articulate and attentive with saying that there are people facing homelessness. So I don't know if you've had training on that, if that's come into your schooling at all. Maybe touch on the word choice.
Yeah.
I think you've done a really good job with that.
Yeah. So there's a really, it's a distinction. It really is. So instead of saying Dolphus is homeless, saying Dolphus is facing homelessness is a really, really important distinction, because I use that just saying the homeless, or the individual who is homeless. probably up until like the end of 2015. Like in those community meetings, I would be saying, yeah, we're going to be housing the homeless. And when you really put that word like facing, you make it very clear that it's just a temporary thing. It's just something that someone's going through, and that they may not have had the support or the necessary things wrapped around them to get out of this thing. But when you say that person is homeless, as I said, there's a lot of, that's a loaded term, and it comes with a lot of, that language comes with a lot of baggage. And yeah, so I'm very intentional about just saying facing homelessness or things like that. Yeah.
How many applications do you get? How do you choose who's going to live in
Yeah, it's super hard. I mean, yeah. I mean, we had over a dozen applications for the 3 homes that we're opening up on November 11th, and ultimately, it comes down to my decision and a group of 2 of my board members, and it's hard because we want to like really give it to people who most need it. Like we don't want to pick like the cream of the crop of individuals who are in the shelter or who are on the streets. But we also don't want to kind of overburden ourselves right now where we're not able to work with people. So it's really finding that middle ground. And ultimately,
interview process?
Yeah. I mean, I sit down for coffee with these guys all the time and then invite them to those residence dinners. I think that's super important as well. But Dolphus and James, the guys who live in there now, are guys who I've known for a long, long time. So they didn't so much go through that application process. It was just, they were both on my mind a lot through this whole thing, and knew it was going to happen. But,
It's amazing.
thanks.
How long is the wait list, and does the wait list motivate you to go out and get more grants?
I suppose. I mean, the wait list is dependent upon how quickly we can put up units. And unfortunately, we're going to have, we have 12 people who have already submitted applications. We're going to have 9 guys who are still going to be waiting until the spring when we build those 7 units. And we'll have a lot more applications after that, which is really, like, I just think telling of the fact that there's nowhere else in the city where these guys can really live, where they feel safe and feel like they can really find any kind of permanent, any sort of stability. But yeah, I guess it does motivate me. Yeah, I guess it does motivate me for sure. Yeah, that's hard to think that I mean, having those conversations with guys saying you're going to have to wait till spring of 2017 it sucks. Yeah. You had a question?
If I understand it correctly, the homes are for men. Is that true of all of them?
Yep. So as I said, we only have 2 units so far. The 3 that are going to be opening up on November 11th are only for men as well. Right. There's definitely plans to build units for women as well. But I think that we would want to have like property that's just women, property that's just men. And as we develop more of that, those will certainly come to fruition. Yeah. Good question. Yeah.
I just had 2 questions. So first, why are you separating by gender? And second, you mentioned a lot about what Dolphus is doing now, but I was wondering if you would talk more about what James is doing.
Sure. First, mention this is separating by gender. A lot of the individuals that we're housing have backgrounds that would just make that safer, and where probably just separating by gender would be, one, more comfortable for the community, but also better for the individuals we're housing. No doubt about that. Like, just not having those temptations around, I think is something that if we can affect that, then yeah, we're going to do that. The second piece is James. As soon as James moved into our house, I was able to find him a job up at the VA hospital, which is just like a short 10-minute bike ride away, and he works there full time now, and he's dynamite. Love him.
How long do you expect them to stay in the houses you built? Like, is this for the next 10 years, or do you think there's going to be turnover?
Yeah, that is a great question. I should have mentioned that earlier. So the question was, how long do I expect them to stay? And they can stay for as long as they want. So they can stay for as long as they're fulfilling their lease agreement, paying rent, and as long as it's supporting them. Now, if James gets to a point where he saves up some money and wants to, like, move outside of the city or move to somewhere bigger, like, I will support him 100%. If this is exactly where he wants to live for the rest of his life, I'll support him 100% as well. I think that there's a big, in the world of homeless services, there's this big push to have transitional living. And I think a lot of that is based on numbers. So Dolphus, in 90 days, he moves out. That's 1 person we successfully served. And that's someone else we can kind of take on. And in another 90 days, the next person moves out. That's 2 people we served. And then the next 90 days, that's 3. Whereas now, like, we're just serving Dolphus. Like, that's just 1 person. And grants are really dependent upon the number of people you serve, for better or for worse. So it's definitely a little bit more lucrative and more sexy to say, yeah, I served 15 people in the course of the year, versus saying I just served Dolphus really, really well for 1 year. And yeah, I just don't want to get in and play that game.
I think it's really good that you have site-built housing, not manufactured housing, because that makes it look like some kind of temporary survivor space because a hurricane came in and blew down your house or something like that. And the neighbors might say, oh, this is just a temporary horrible thing, whereas you're giving the neighborhood a property.
For sure. Yeah, no, the comment was just, it's nicer to have a site built, meaning something that's not like prefabbed off site and then kind of just dropped there and then can be taken off really quickly. Like, we got a foundation there, that's not going anywhere. And yeah, I think it's a lot more powerful for neighbors thinking this is not just going to be this like young white kid with a majority white board coming in there, getting their PR and then leaving right away. Like, we're there for a while. Yeah. Cool. Yeah.
I'm surprised no one else asked this. How could our community be most useful for you?
Yeah. It's a good question, and we were talking a little bit about this earlier. The most helpful times for big groups to do like real tangible work is right when we get property. So at the beginning of 2017, once it turns nice again, we're going to be cleaning up those 7 lots and really getting people, going to need a lot of hands on deck there. That's kind of tangible stuff. Now, if there is, I often say, like, look, if your interest is in homelessness, awesome, get in touch and we will find a way to do this. But if your interest isn't, if your interest is in climate or in animal rights, whatever, like, find ways to get involved with that. Like, I don't want to monopolize people's time, and I would much rather prefer to have one person who's super into homelessness than 15 people who are kind of lukewarm about it. So, of course, if we can get a big group of people from Colgate to come out and help clear a lot, that'd be awesome. But if there's 1 or 2 people who care deeply about homelessness, like, that's really what I'm looking for. And that's people who can come, kind of meet our residents, figure out where they can kind of plug in, and I think that's the most valuable piece. Neat. Well, again, we have a website at tinyhomeforgood.org. All the contacts on there, any of our information, whatever. Feel free to reach out if you have suggestions, thoughts. Love to hear them. But thank you for the invite. And yeah, thanks for listening.